The story of Dylan Farrow and Woody Allen is an old controversy that never seems to go away and has managed to stay in the public light for 3 decades. Yet those years haven't added clarity. Even as I speak, there's an HBO docuseries by Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick that was just released. I've seen the first 2 episodes, and for those who watch the HBO series carefully, you will be left with more questions than answers. That's the reason the story persists. There's lots of innuendo, but still no broad consensus to the simple question: did Woody Allen sexually assault Dylan Farrow? That's all most people want to know, and yet no one, including HBO, has been able to tell this story in a succinct way that's easy to understand without losing the audience in a maze of countervailing facts. Well, today, I'm going to tell you what happened, and I'm going to respond to the first 2 HBO episodes in doing so. The truth is actually very simple. I know that's hard to believe. There's a sense that the truth just becomes more elusive over time. Instead of clarity, what we have are 2 opposing camps. One camp firmly believes that Dylan Farrow was sexually assaulted and points out Woody's behavior. The other camp just as firmly believes that Woody Allen is innocent and is firmly dedicated to rehabilitating his public image. I want to be honest about my motivation and how it evolved. My interest in this story started a different way than most people. You see, I was a teenager and in love with pop culture back in the 90s when this scandal unfolded. So I've grown up with this story, and I've watched Mia Farrow's children grow up with me. My family were refugees from a war-torn country. As an awkward, nerdy Asian American teenager, I never saw people like me in the press. That was until I noticed the Farrow children. Lark, Tam, and Daisy were a little older than me, but close enough to my age that it made me curious what was life like for them, as well as for Soon Yi and Moses, who came from another war-torn Asian country. If the war had taken a slightly different turn, I felt I could just as easily have been one of these kids. The Farrow family and Mia herself seemed so cool back then. A bunch of kids from all over the world living a New England celebrity life, a life so very different than the Texas suburbs I grew up in. I didn't exactly envy their life. By the 90s, I was into punk and alternative music, trying desperately to not be the boring nerd that I obviously was, and their New England prep school life seemed less interesting to me. But then I read an article about how Daisy and Lark were caught shoplifting. It was the first time I had a glimpse into their life, and it turns out they were rebels and delinquents. I became curious again. Shortly afterwards, Soon-Yi began appearing in the headlines when she started dating Woody Allen. But oddly, though she was often talked about, she was never heard from. This only added to the mystery of the Farrow household. I never lost interest in what happened to all of those kids, and when the accusations of sexual assault was revealed, it was through that lens that I interpreted this story. The possibility of Dylan's molestation, Lark and Daisy being busted for shoplifting, Woody Allen dating his ex-girlfriend's daughter. These were all the data points that made it clear life was anything but idyllic in that house. It seemed like something horrible lay just underneath the surface. I wanted to know what happened to those kids, but I was not interested in defending Woody Allen. Yeah, his books were funny, but he lost me as a fan when he made boring movies about relationships. More importantly, I'm just not interested in defending a potential child molester. I remember reading the 1992 Vanity Fair article by Maureen Orth, where they talk about Woody putting his finger in Dylan's butthole. That's so gross, and if true, how could you defend this man? At the same time, I found the other side equally suspicious. In that same article, Mia Farrow was described as a near saint-like figure who walked on water. She was an infallible, perfect mother. Meanwhile, Soon Yi was painted as a naive foreigner with subpar intelligence, easily groomed, incapable of speaking coherently, and a dumb puppet. I remember thinking, why would a mother allow such horrible things to be published about her daughter? So I honestly didn't know what to think about Dylan Farrow's claim of sexual assault. I truly didn't fall in either camp back in the 90s. Woody did seem capable of molesting her. Mia did seem capable of coaching and gaslighting her. They both seemed like horrible parents. All I knew was poor Dylan. She was obviously a victim to someone. I simply had the feeling that the truth was ultimately unknowable. But 2 things happened since. The internet happened, making all of the court documents available, and I grew up to be a data analyst professionally, accustomed to checking key assumptions and corroborating facts. I can tell you, having followed this story for 30 years, that the truth is knowable. My motivation has changed. It's no longer a curiosity about what life was like in the Farrow household for all those children. My motivation now is to shed light on child abuse and how it operates, and I believe now more than ever it's important to have elevated dialogue and promote evidence-based thinking. I can tell you, regardless of which camp you are in, the truth is much worse than you ever imagined. As Dylan states at the beginning of the HBO documentary, what people know is just the tip of the iceberg. Neither camp truly understands the scale of the abuse. The same abuse that has traumatized Dylan Farrow goes deeper and has destroyed more lives than you realize, and to this day, there has been no public scrutiny on the true horror of it all. Some history is useful for those unfamiliar with Mia Farrow. HBO has chosen her for the centerpiece of their show. But who is Mia Farrow? She's an actress, but she's known more for her many children. Also, she's been in the press more for her off-screen persona than her on-screen one. For the past 50 years, she's stayed in tune with every American cultural trend, and it's a part of her adoption strategy. In the 70s, in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, she started adopting Asian orphans. In the late 80s and early 90s, when the crack epidemic ravaged black communities, she started adopting black children, Quincy and Isaiah, kids that her friends call crack babies.
Every adoption was planned. She has a black child. He was a crack baby.
In the 90s, during the moral panic of satanic ritual abuse, she claimed one of her children, Dylan Farrow, was abused by a man that she referred to as satanic. She forgave Woody Allen in 2006. Then, in the Me Too era, she had forgotten that she forgave him and is now accusing Woody Allen of sexual assault again. In 2020, she appears to support Black Lives Matter, but she can't even remember her black children's names. Apparently, she doesn't have pictures of Isaiah and Quincy. She has to Google them. It's also worth pointing out that in 2006, when she forgave Woody Allen, there was no such forgiveness for Soon-Yi. In the same article where she graciously forgives Woody, she attacks Soon-Yi by calling her estranged and strange. She even uses this opportunity to make a pun, as if she delights in abandoning her children. At this point in her life, she had also abandoned Lark Previn, another Asian American daughter who sadly was dying from AIDS. She might as well have added, "I only adopted Lark on a lark." That same year, she attacked Soon-Yi again in another interview, saying Soon-Yi's point of view is very limited, and she married Woody Allen for his money. In other words, she called Soon-Yi a dumb gold digger.
Now, I ain't saying she a gold digger, but she...
In a 2013 Vanity Fair article, she admits to committing revenge porn against Soon-Yi by distributing sexual photos of Soon-Yi to her biological sons who are all adult males. It also appears that she gave them to the press. This was obviously done without Soon-Yi's consent to humiliate her. In episode 2, HBO paints Mia as a forgiving mother towards Soon-Yi, but Ziering and Dick don't bother fact-checking her against her own words in the press and her own prior behaviors. This is why many people who have paid attention to Mia Farrow over the years feel that she has a casual disregard for her adopted children. She forgets who her black children are. She's abandoned Asian American children, 3 of whom are dead and 2 are estranged. When she adopted Soon-Yi in the 70s, she showed up to the orphanage with cameras. These kids never seemed precious. They were press releases. Also, one has to wonder, why would a mother forgive a man whom she claims sexually assaulted her daughter? None of this is evidence of Dylan's claim of sexual assault one way or another, but it does point out that HBO has chosen to use an unreliable narrator for their story, which makes getting to the truth that much harder, but not impossible. The rest of us just need to stay focused on what happened in the house and corroborate it. One key concept to establishing the truth against multiple theories is to look for patterns of a given phenomenon. Single instances can occur, but when talking about child abuse, there's almost always a repeated pattern. This isn't just true with child predators at large, it's true in the Farrow household as well. The HBO series would have you believe that Dylan Farrow is the only victim of abuse in that home, or at least the most important one. There have, in fact, been 6. Moses and Soon-Yi have detailed a long history of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse in the home that started in the 80s. Their testimony of abuses is also corroborated by multiple other witnesses. It's a household ruled by a mother's rage who didn't have the patience and emotional bandwidth to take care of so many kids. Many of the adopted kids suffered physical disabilities, yet they were dragged down staircases, slapped around, punched in the chest, and had objects thrown at them. They were emotionally abused as well. They appeared to be neglected and they weren't allowed any therapy. They were yelled at, they were gaslit to believe false narratives, and they lived in fear of their mother's rage. We also see that Lark and Soon Yi were treated like servants and maids. They had to cook, change the sheets, do the grocery shopping, do the housekeeping. They had to take care of the other kids, including Dylan and Ronan. One observer said Lark was treated like a scullery maid. Lark and Soon Yi appear to be exploited for free labor, which makes sense since Andre Previn never seemed to help out around the house, and Mia had 14 children to take care of. Dylan Farrow claims to be the victim of sexual assault by Woody Allen in 1992. That same turbulent year, Mia Farrow also found out about Soon Yi's relationship with Woody Allen. Mia admits it was an unstable time for the family, yet she would bring Tam Farrow, a blind Vietnamese child, into this volatile home and claim her as a single parent. It's clear this would be a mistake, as Tam would commit suicide one night in 2000 after Mia and her got into an argument. These long-standing abuses and neglect would also take their toll on another Vietnamese American daughter, Lark Previn, who would end up struggling with drug addiction, abandonment by her parents, and eventual death by AIDS in 2008. Thaddeus Farrow, an Indian immigrant and paraplegic, also appeared to have suffered from long-standing emotional abuse, neglect, and physical abuse, and would shoot himself in 2016. Moses, Soon Yi, and Dylan also appear to be sexually abused. Moses details how Mia Farrow sexually humiliated him as punishment for cutting off the belt loops of his pants. She made him strip and stand naked in the middle of the room to embarrass him in front of his siblings. Forcing a child to get naked against their will to be humiliated by other children is sexual abuse. Soon Yi is also a victim of sexual abuse. In a 2013 Vanity Fair article, it appears that Mia Farrow distributed sexual photos of Soon Yi as retaliation for her affair with Woody. In Mia's own words, these photos were pornographic, and yet she shared them with her children and with the press. It's clear these photos were distributed with intent to humiliate Soon Yi, and they were distributed without Soon Yi's consent. That's called revenge porn. It's sexual abuse, and many experts consider revenge porn sexual assault. Also keep in mind that Soon Yi was surrounded by Mia's older biological sons for her entire childhood, Fletcher, Sasha, and Matthew. They would have gone through puberty around the same time she was. It's possible they sexualized her growing up, especially if they saw their mother didn't respect her as a girl and a young woman. When Mia distributed Soon Yi's photos to these sons, none of them stood up for Soon Yi and even appeared complicit in their mother's crime. One of the sons, Matthew, even gave these photos to his girlfriend, Priscilla Gilman, who commented about the photos in the press and made fun of Soon Yi, painting her as a dumb girl and a feral animal who would spit and scratch at people. Maureen Orth published all of their comments in multiple Vanity Fair articles that failed fact-checking. Soon Yi is also a victim of slut-shaming, and she still is to this day. It's clear Soon Yi has always wanted to keep her sex life private, but Priscilla Gilman and Mia Farrow can't stop talking about it even after 30 years. When the 2013 Vanity Fair article came out, Soon Yi is already a mother of two, but this doesn't stop Priscilla Gilman from slut-shaming her. Now in the HBO series, Mia Farrow talks about condoms and wastebaskets and cum-stained sheets. She's still clearly obsessed with Soon Yi's sex life. Also keep in mind that Tam Farrow and Lark Previn are already dead when Maureen Orth published her 2013 article. Moses is also estranged, yet Orth does no investigations, no follow-up questions. She rather focuses on Mia's histrionics and Soon Yi's sex life. She calls the home a triumph and a loving home, despite two kids being dead. She even lies about the cause of their death. What's also key in these abuses is a pattern of scripting, drilling, and gaslighting by Mia Farrow. Moses has been most articulate about this, but there's other evidence in Mia's gaslighting in court documents as well. It seems all of the children lived in a culture of constant gaslighting by their mother and were forced to believe false narratives. For example, Mia Farrow tried to make Soon Yi believe a lie about her birth mother when she was just a little girl, and she tried to record Soon Yi on videotape saying it. In Mia's story, Soon Yi's prostitute mother was a violent woman who would crush her head in the doorway as punishment. Mia Farrow liked this bizarre, violent story so much that she got it published in the 1992 Vanity Fair article. But Soon Yi makes it clear that it isn't true. Maureen Orth would also later admit that her articles failed fact-checking. Mia wanted to push this grotesque and false story, presumably because it was more dramatic. Orth published all of these lies because she's a lazy journalist who has no investigative instincts and is completely uncritical of Mia's narrative, a pattern we see repeated by Ziering and Dick. Mia also forced Soon Yi to call her good mama and her birth mother naughty mama. It's a pattern repeated by Moses, who also fell prey to Mia's gaslighting. They would often be for small things, like forcing him to admit he misplaced a tape measure, or that he drew the curtains when they shouldn't have been drawn. Yet if he didn't repeat her story and confess to her version, it would trigger his mother's rage. He would get punched in the chest or get slapped so hard that his glasses went flying. He would also be called a liar. Moses claims all the children fell prey to Mia's gaslighting. Contrary to HBO's depiction of a forgiving mother, Moses points out that she told the kids Soon Yi is dead to us. And starting in 1992, Mia would go around the house yelling constantly that Woody is satanic and the devil. The children grew to repeat it and grew to hate Woody Allen and their sister, Soon Yi. This is corroborated by the nanny, social workers, a therapist, as well as Moses himself. Soon Yi also points out preferential treatment in the home. While the adopted Asian Americans got abused, the other children were favored. This corroborates with known facts. Only adopted children seem to be abused. Mia Farrow's biological children, Matthew, Sasha, Fletcher, and Ronan, have not made any claims of abuse against her. I should also point out that Woody Allen also has two other children with Soon Yi, Bishay and Manzi. Neither of them have made any claims of abuse against Woody Allen either. The abuses only appear to happen to Mia Farrow's adopted children. The media has ignored or diminished the death and abuses of the Asian American children and prefer to focus solely on Dylan Farrow. But that's telling a story without 83% of the data, which is really the whole picture. We also know that most abuses follow a pattern, especially when we talk about child predators, so it's logical to review these abuses together. So with these 6 data points, we do see a pattern of abuse. It is hard to imagine that Woody Allen sexually assaulted all of these children. None of the other children have claimed sexual abuse by Woody Allen, both inside and outside Mia's home. It's possible that Dylan Farrow was an isolated incident of child sexual assault, but for pedophiles, there is always a repeated pattern of abuse, so it's possible, but unlikely. It's more logical and consistent that these children suffered the same pattern of abuse, a pattern of physical and emotional abuse accompanied by sexual humiliation and gaslighting by a parent who has a history of pushing grotesque false narratives onto her children. Dylan Farrow is sadly another child in a long-standing pattern of abuse in the home, and she was gaslit into believing a false trauma of sexual assault by a rageful mother, willing to put her own needs before her children. It's not just me saying this, it's their therapists. The psychiatrists who were treating Woody Allen, Mia Farrow, and Dylan have all testified in court. These are the professional women closest to the mental and emotional state of all 3 people, Mia, Woody, and Dylan. If anyone is an expert on their personalities and could understand what they were capable of, it would be these 2 doctors, not journalists, filmmakers, friends, or YouTubers like me. What do those expert witnesses think? They believe Woody is innocent. If the therapists who treated them believe Woody is innocent, why doesn't the public? That's because these therapists have often been misquoted or willfully misinterpreted in the press by journalists like Maureen Orth and filmmakers like Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick. But their testimony is very clear. They believe Woody is innocent. You have to understand something about therapists. They are bound by patient confidentiality, which is why they cannot talk freely to the press or clarify the record. They can only provide testimony in court, which is how I got their testimony, from the court documents. But this is why journalists have had free rein on using their observations out of context for the past 30 years. If you need further evidence of the extreme level of gaslighting Mia heaped upon her children, let's introduce a 7th data point, Ronan Farrow. The press, Maureen Orth specifically, would have you believe that Ronan and Woody never got along.
Ronan was just 4 years old at the time and always had a difficult relationship with the famed auteur.
Ronan and Woody seemed have always to have been like oil and water.
But social workers provide a different story. After the custody trial between Woody and Mia, Woody was only allowed supervised visits with Ronan Farrow. What did these supervisors observe? Again, keep in mind that these are observations from neutral social workers whose job is to protect children. Frances Greenberg and Virginia Lehman observed the following typical interaction between Woody and Ronan during the visitations. Woody would say, "I love you as much as a river." Ronan would say, "I love you as much as New York City." Woody would reply, "I love you as much as the stars." Ronan then says, "I love you as much as the universe." It's extremely sweet, but it wouldn't last. Greenberg and Lehman observed that Ronan once said, "I like you, but I'm not supposed to love you." What else did the social workers observe? Woody never said a bad thing about Mia to Dylan or Ronan. He kept their personal animosity away from the children. In fact, he only said positive things about Mia to Dylan and Ronan. According to the social workers, the most distressing part of what they heard was what Ronan says to Woody about a doctor he was seeing. Ronan said he was seeing a doctor that was going to help him not to see Woody anymore. After 8 or 10 visits with the doctor, he will no longer have to see Woody. Let's be clear about this. Mia Farrow hired a therapist to completely erase Ronan's love for Woody. Apparently, she wanted Ronan all to herself. And the sad thing is, it worked. Ronan has been estranged from Woody ever since. I have to admit, this is the most extreme level of gaslighting I've ever heard a parent take. The active use of doctors to erase a child's memory. Not only does this corroborate with what Soon-Yi and Moses have been telling us, it shows a premeditated, well thought out plan to actively and effectively change a person's story. If she was capable of doing this to Ronan, it's clear she's capable of doing this to Dylan. Some have tried to discount Moses and Soon-Yi's accounts, though they have no basis to do so, but this account is from neutral social workers. We also see that Mia Farrow is not just a parent who's trying to raise her children beyond her means. She is actively trying to script their thoughts, their feelings, and their lives to the utmost degree. Moses Farrow was right. She's obsessed with gaslighting her children. And it isn't just the children that Mia pressured to change their stories. It's the woman who worked for her too. Like Christy Grodeke and Monica Thompson, they both admitted to being pressured by Mia Farrow to tell her side of the story during the custody trial. HBO even uses Christy Grodeke's testimony in court, but they failed to inform you that Christy Grodeke would later admit she actually didn't lose sight of Woody for more than a few minutes. She even admitted to feeling guilty for allowing Miss Farrow to say those things about Woody Allen. Mia Farrow also fired both of the therapists I previously mentioned because they wouldn't side with her story. She even turned Dylan and Ronan against Nancy Schultz, evidence that she was gaslighting Dylan and Ronan to hate their therapist whom they previously loved. It's clear, based on neutral observers, professional therapists, and social workers, and from the observations of the other children in the home, and from repeated patterns of abuse in the home, that Dylan Farrow was likely gaslit by her mother into believing a false trauma of sexual assault. You may ask why a mother would do this. Dr. Coates, again, would shed light to Mia's motivation. According to the doctor, in the days leading up to the false allegation, Mia exhibited escalating rage during their sessions. She said Mia was out of control. The doctor said Mia felt variously that Mr. Allen should be killed, she would like to kill him, or that she would like to stab his eyes out. And no, this wasn't Mia just being dramatic. Mia's vengeful rage was severe enough that the doctor testified she was concerned for Woody's health. The doctor says, "I felt it was a really dangerous situation. In my clinical evaluation, this is a place where protection was needed." This is a clinical psychologist who made the professional assessment that Mia Farrow was a danger and capable of violence. It wasn't just Mia's words that frightened the doctor. It was Mia's behavior. Mia sent Woody what could be considered a death threat against him and Soon-Yi. It's a violent Valentine's present, a heart with pictures of the family members with skewers and a knife through the pictures. She glues a sexual image of Soon-Yi to the handle of the knife. It's hard to imagine a more fitting symbol of murderous, jealous rage. A gift like this is certainly indicative of a creative, unhinged mind. We would all be frightened if we received this in the mail. You'll notice the handle of the knife also includes a photocopied image of Soon-Yi. This was the 90s. Mia had to go to a Kinko's to make photocopies of a picture she considers pornographic. This shows intent to distribute. It's clear she also put a lot of thought into this art piece and the narrative it tells, a story of sexual violence and grotesque imagery. In the testimony of a clinical psychologist, as well as Mia's own behavior, we see a clear motive. Jealous rage, a rage that's corroborated by multiple other children, including Moses and Soon-Yi. Mia adopted Tam that same year as a single parent, shortly after she found out about the affair with Soon-Yi. Mia was clearly emotionally volatile and full of rage. Mia herself admits the home was unstable during that time. I believe Tam would become Mia's emotional punching bag and would kill herself 8 years later after an argument with her mother, as Moses contends. Motivation is key to any crime, so let's delve into it further, as many people have misunderstood Mia's rage. If you or I had someone preying on our children, of course, we too would be rightfully angry. However, this notion is wrong. Mia's rage was not out of concern for her children. Court documents and Mia's own statements in the press show a different motivation. In August 1992, 7 months after the affair with Soon-Yi was revealed, Mia Farrow still wanted to marry Woody Allen. The doctor recounts Mia asking her, "Should I marry him?" Despite calling Woody satanic and evil in the same conversation, Mia still wanted Woody in her life. Woody compounded the situation by continuing to have discourse with her about their relationship, which only led Mia on. You hear some of this lover's quarrel in an illegally recorded phone conversation in the HBO series. At this point, Mia Farrow already accused Woody Allen of molesting her daughter, Soon-Yi. But the question is this: why would you want to marry a man that you said was a child molester? Because you know it's not true. We know that she beat Soon-Yi repeatedly throughout her life. These quotes and Mia's own behavior shows Mia treated Soon-Yi as a sexual romantic competitor, not as a daughter. She's jealous of Soon-Yi. This also explains why she sexually humiliated Soon-Yi with revenge porn. It's clear that Soon-Yi has always wanted to keep her sex life private, but Mia keeps bringing it up to the press. She did so in 1992, again in 2013, and she continues to do so in the HBO documentary with stories of condoms and cum-stained sheets. You have to understand some history to understand the depth of Mia's feelings of rejection and rage. Christina Engelhardt is interviewed in the HBO series, but they provide an inaccurate picture. Ziering and Dick failed to mention that Mia Farrow also had a sexual relationship with Christina Engelhardt. They had three-way sex together, multiple times. Yes, it was consensual, and they all enjoyed it. They were kinky sexual libertines and products of a free love culture, but the times have changed, and this would reflect poorly on Mia, so they leave it out. However, it's completely disingenuous because it changes the entire dynamic of their relationship. If they want to paint Miss Engelhardt as a victim, then she's also a victim of Mia Farrow, who is much older than her as well. Plus, it's hypocritical to slut-shame Soon-Yi with stories about her sex life, but protect Mia's Catholic image. Though Mia and Engelhardt would become friends, the three-way was clearly Woody's idea. Miss Engelhardt states, "I always had the impression that she was doing this because he wanted it. I felt sorry for Mia," she says. Mia Farrow just wasn't enough for Woody sexually, and her sense of rejection had been long simmering. Frank Sinatra married Mia when she was 19. Andre Previn left his wife for Mia Farrow. She had always gotten the marriages she wanted, but Woody was a challenge. He was happy to date her. She saw in him a devoted father, which is why she initially gave him custody of Moses, Dylan, and Ronan, and she wanted to marry him. But though he was happy to date her, happy to be a father to the three youngest, he never wanted to marry her. Mia would later admit that the biological child they had together, Ronan Farrow, wasn't actually Woody's, that in fact she had been having sex with Frank Sinatra while they were dating. But when she was pregnant with Sinatra's baby, she lied to Woody and made him think the baby was his. Why would someone lie to a man about a child being his? It was a way to keep Woody in a relationship. Mia knew he was more interested in being a father than being a husband, but in the end, she couldn't keep him. Woody Allen moved on. He didn't love Mia Farrow the same way she loved him, and despite a decade together, he would leave her. There's nothing more devastating than romantic and sexual rejection. Added to that rejection was the fact that Woody left her for a younger woman, one that she considered beneath her. Mia never called Soon-Yi a gook or a chink, but it's clear she treated her like one. She humiliated her for learning English too slowly. She called her dumb and moronic when she was just a child. She made Soon-Yi and Lark do all the housework so she could talk on the phone and make scrapbooks instead. Rejection is one thing, but rejection for someone you think is beneath you only adds fuel to the fire. Heartbreak is painful, but it's no excuse to destroy yet another child. It does, however, explain motivation. Dr. Susan Coates and the nanny, Monica Thompson, corroborate this. Not only was Mia volatile, erratic, and prone to mood swings, she became eerily calm immediately after Dylan makes her claim of sexual assault. Let's look at the timeline. August 1st, Mia is rageful, out of control. She calls Woody satanic and evil. She asks the doctor to help her stop Woody Allen. August 5th, Mia is oddly calm. She claims Woody Allen sexually assaulted her child. Think about that for a second. If your child just told you she was sexually assaulted, would you be more angry or suddenly calm? Mia Farrow was calm. What was she doing during those 3 days? She invents a false sexual assault claim and makes a video recording of it. This is presumably the video you saw on HBO. Mia Farrow thinks this is evidence of sexual assault. What HBO doesn't tell you in that episode is this timeline. They also don't tell you that the videotape was already dismissed and undermined by multiple witnesses. Lieutenant Richard Marcus, a New York City police officer and the former head of the sex crimes unit, reviewed the videotape. This is a man motivated to put child molesters in jail and had done so for much of his career. He said the tape seemed rehearsed. Dr. Stephen Herman was one of Mia's own witnesses, yet he too admitted that the tape set a tone for a child on how to answer. Monica Thompson witnessed coaching firsthand, saying that Mia kept badgering Dylan with questions for 2 or 3 days. What did Daddy do? What did Daddy do next? Did Daddy take off your underwear? Given that every single doctor, therapist, police officer, social worker, in fact, every single witness who viewed the tape considers it a lie, why would HBO use it? There's something even more horrifying about this. Why was Dylan seeing a therapist to begin with? Dr. Nancy Schultz testified that Dylan was having issues with reality. Mia Farrow obviously knew this. She was exploiting her daughter's mental issues with reality and recording it on videotape. Cultural and historical context is also key. Mia Farrow's behavior in creating a false trauma of abuse may be hard for some people to believe, but it's sadly very common. We know that false accusations are common during custody battles, especially bad ones like Mia's and Woody's. You also have to remember that these allegations took place in 1992. What was happening at that time? The same year that Mia invented the molestation, the Martinsville scandal made worldwide news. Numerous children, egged on by their parents, made false sexual assault claims against daycare workers and police officers, who they called satanic. Like Dylan, these children were also recorded on videotape. In 1990, the McMartin daycare trial just ended. It had been the most expensive and most widely publicized trial in U.S. history. 360 children made false allegations of sexual assault, egged on by their parents, recorded on videotape against people they considered satanic. Moses, Monica Thompson, and Dr. Coates point out that Mia constantly called Woody a Satanist, the devil, not only in her home for all the children to hear, but in therapy sessions as well. Despite these women and men being exonerated, the children retain their trauma to this day and continue to believe the sexual assault was real, just like Dylan Farrow does. What you should know when you watch that video on HBO is that it's not proof of sexual assault. You are watching a mother using technology to emotionally abuse her child in real time, knowing full well that the child already had a history of mental issues with reality. It's also just wrong. We should not be watching a naked 7-year-old telling a lie of sexual assault that she clearly believes in. What HBO did is deeply irresponsible, and the last thing we should do is encourage rageful parents to extract testimony of sexual abuse from their naked child and record it on videotape. We need to leave that kind of testimony to the experts to extract. We can sympathize with Dylan and understand why she still believes in the assault. The trauma is real, even if the assault was not. And let's not forget what Moses said about the culture in Mia's home of constant, daily gaslighting. During the custody trial, Moses himself sided with Mia Farrow, but he's now a therapist himself and admits it took him years of therapy and estrangement to unwind the false narratives Mia had forced upon the children. However, Moses was older. Dylan was only 7 when these events unfolded. Imagine how impossible it would be for Dylan to unwind the truth of her trauma. Okay, so what do we have? We have patterns of prior and subsequent abuses. We have evidence from court documents from expert witnesses. We have a parent obsessed with video recordings and false narratives. We have multiple investigations. We have a motive. I promised at the beginning that this is a simple story, so let me tell it to you simply. There had been long-standing neglect and abuse in the Farrow household. Many of the adopted children, including Lark, Soon-Yi, Moses, Dylan, Tam, and Thaddeus, had been living with a rageful parent who didn't have the emotional capacity and patience required to take care of so many children. She took these children for granted. Her abuse included physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, accompanied by gaslighting and scripting them to believe false narratives. She also exploited them for free labor. All of the abuses existed before the scandal broke in 1992. Dylan Farrow was sadly just the next child in a long history of abuse in the home, and her abuse follows a similar pattern of gaslighting committed against all the adopted kids. Mia also adopted Tam Farrow that same year while she was in an emotional, fragile state and full of rage. And Mia would go on to take out her frustrations on Tam Farrow, leading to Tam's suicide in 2000. Woody Allen did not molest Dylan Farrow. His relationship with Soon-Yi was irresponsible and selfish, but he's not a pedophile. Dylan Farrow was emotionally abused by her mother with a false narrative of sexual assault. Mia traumatized her because she was angry at Soon-Yi's relationship with Woody. Though Woody was able to repair his relationship with his oldest child, Moses, Ronan and Dylan have remained estranged from Woody because they were too young at the time. Like many victims of false trauma, to this day, Dylan, and likely Ronan too, believe in the trauma of the sexual assault. Lark died of AIDS, unsupported by her mother and father. She was always neglected by her parents as a child, and she was abandoned as an adult. Thaddeus killed himself, unable to recover from his emotional abuse, extreme neglect, and physical abuses. Moses and Soon-Yi simply want to move on with their life and aren't interested in the press and the media. That's what the totality of circumstantial evidence shows. That's the real story. One thing I notice is that many people have a hard time seeing the story because they want to center the story on Woody Allen's behaviors. They can't see obvious patterns of abuse against all of the children, or evidence from court documents or testimony from expert witnesses. Their image of Woody Allen is a mental block, and they can't see anything else but his behaviors. So let me address my feelings on Woody Allen. Yes, he is irresponsible, and he was selfish, as I said. I agree with Judge Wilk on this point. Even though Soon-Yi claims they didn't date until she was in college, he and Soon-Yi started dating when he was still entangled with Mia and her other children. Soon-Yi, Woody, and Mia Farrow never agreed on the timing of when one relationship ended and the new one began. But regardless, it's clear that Woody and Mia had a very toxic relationship. One that he exacerbated by continuing to lead Mia on after their relationship should have ended. Woody Allen also dated teenagers. This is irrefutable. It does not, however, make him a pedophile who preys on prepubescent children. Therapists have already testified that he has no sexual issues with children. Woody Allen did not abuse all of these children. Mia Farrow did. She's a child predator who has serially preyed on the least protected people in the world, orphans and immigrant children who have nowhere to turn to and were abused in their own home. That's what the facts show. Mia Farrow has been brazen about her abuses. She's been protected because her victims are immigrant children of color that nobody cares about, and she's had journalists like Maureen Orth and Ronan Farrow in her corner. If she was a black mother, her house would have been monitored by CPS, and she would have had her children taken away. If that had happened, perhaps Tam and Thaddeus could have gotten the help they needed and would still be alive. How is it even possible that a single parent was even capable of adopting Tam and Thaddeus when she was obviously mentally unsound and had a history of abuse? I was really hoping Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick would finally tell this story right. But they have fallen in line, proven their incompetence, have been outmatched, or simply don't care about people of color. Or they want to be the ones to take down the next big fish, Woody Allen. Like I mentioned before, Mia has a history of using her children to stay in the public spotlight. She hasn't made a good movie since 1968. Now, 50 years later, she's got the lead role in an HBO documentary series, completely uninterested in corroborating her story. It might as well have been written and directed by Mia Farrow. We are now halfway through the series, and I just finished watching episode 2. Ziering and Dick haven't even mentioned the dead kids and the abuses of the Asian American children. Tam Farrow should be the first question Mia is asked at every interview for the rest of her life. Tam died randomly in Mia's house, and everyone ignores the fact, not a single eyebrow raised. Maybe they will address these abuses later, but these children should have been in the introduction. Their abuses tell the entire story. Their omission from the beginning is not only anti-factual, it's racist. And that's another problem the press has not been honest about. It's hard to draw any other conclusion. Mia simply treated the white children better than the Asian American ones. The Asian children dealt with neglect and abuse. They had to deal with the drudgery of endless housework. They were treated like servants. They had to cook and clean and take care of the other kids. They were berated, yelled at. They were told they were moronic, stupid, liars. They were made to get naked and humiliated in front of their siblings. They were slapped around, hit on their chests, dragged down staircases, locked in outdoor sheds overnight. They had objects thrown at them. They were emotionally neglected. They were abandoned. Mia yelled at them and fought with them and drove them to suicide. Meanwhile, the white children didn't have to do any of the housework. They got their mother's investment in their education. They got child therapists to attend to their mental well-being. They got driven by their mother to college every day. They weren't forced to strip naked and be gawked at by other siblings. They weren't humiliated. They got flown around the world. They got easy internships working for UNICEF. They are complicit with their mother's crimes against the other children. Their mother gave them a career in the press. Their mother got them book deals. In short, the white kids got their mother's love and encouragement, while the Asian Americans got her anger and her abuses. Ronan, too, was gaslit and estranged from his father, as observed by neutral social workers. He's also a victim to a mother who became increasingly unhinged and obsessive with him. If Woody Allen is to be believed, neutral observers witnessed Mia sleeping naked with Ronan until he was 11. It's also clear she lied to him about his birth father, and according to Moses, Mia had Ronan's legs medically broken and reset so he could appear taller. That procedure is reserved for those who live with dwarfism. For Mia to do this to her son, when he was a minor, for cosmetic reasons, is abuse. At this point, there will be those who won't believe anything I say. All I can do is be transparent about my method and my analysis and how I derive my conclusion, because my method is different than journalists. So here's the assumptions I use in order of priority. Number 1, I assume the victim's claim of abuse is made without ulterior motive. Number 2, I review all abuses in a given home to establish a pattern. Number 3, I privilege testimony from unbiased professionals, social workers, detectives, or therapists. Number 4, I privilege testimony provided in court under threat of perjury by neutral observers. Number 5, I review cultural and historical context to see if there are other trends that corroborate a given narrative. And number 6, last and very least, I use uncorroborated quotes given in the press only as a last resort if no other information exists. I avoid quotes from friends, family members, and lawyers who are obviously biased. But I admit that my method is different than journalists. Journalists and filmmakers, apparently, go straight to number 6. They rely almost entirely on observational quotes and opinions from friends and family members or other celebrities. You'll notice the HBO series features one Priscilla Gilman, who appears in every episode. Who is Priscilla Gilman? She's not a social worker, a detective, a therapist, or anyone who is willing to testify in court. She in fact has no relationship with Soon-Yi or Woody Allen. She's Matthew Previn's girlfriend, yet she's been quoted in the press for the past 30 years as if she's an expert on Soon-Yi. In the 1992 Vanity Fair article, she implies Soon-Yi is incapable of writing her own words, and that she's dumb, even though Soon-Yi was already in college and obviously capable of formulating her own words. Soon-Yi would go on to earn a master's degree in education from Columbia University. Priscilla Gilman also describes Soon-Yi as a feral animal, capable of scratching and spitting at people. But she also said Soon-Yi had a crush on her boyfriend, so her motivation to take Soon-Yi down is suspect. And let's not forget, this is a woman who is more than happy to participate in a campaign of revenge porn against another young woman. Also, if it's true, which I doubt now given Mia's penchant for pushing false narratives on everyone around her, you have to wonder, why would Soon-Yi scratch and spit at Matthew Previn? Is it because he couldn't keep his hands to himself? Everyone in that house seems obsessed with Soon-Yi sexually. Whether you consider Gilman a credible witness is up to you, but her observations are uncorroborated, and she is clearly biased against Soon-Yi. Therefore, her quotes are mere gossip, not to mention mean-spirited and not very feminist. We also know from Soon-Yi, Moses, Monica Thompson, Christy Groteke, and from the firing of Dr. Nancy Schultz and Dr. Coates, that Mia pressured or bullied everyone around her to push her narrative, so why use their quotes at all? Yet this type of uncorroborated observation from a random family friend of Mia who has no relationship with their subject and is not an expert of any sort passes for facts in most of the press and now in the HBO documentary as well. These observations don't shed light. They exist only to create innuendo. This is why in my analysis I also leave out Woody Allen's sister, his lawyers, his celebrity friends like Diane Keaton, Kate Blanchett, or Scarlett Johansson, whose observational quotes and opinions would be equally low priority. But Ziering and Dick draw no distinction between uncorroborated opinion and actual fact. They take these observations completely uncritically. This is the problem with the press. Journalists and filmmakers undermine actual experts. Dr. Susan Coates not only believed Woody is innocent, she made it clear he has no sexual issues with children, and no sexual issues with Dylan specifically. In fact, she testified that he is a devoted father and enormously committed to being a good parent. HBO would have you believe that Woody was sexually obsessed with Dylan, but the doctor makes it very clear the only reason Woody gave Dylan extra attention was because Mia was obsessed with Ronan, and he felt Dylan was being neglected. Ziering and Dick, however, use a different expert witness, Casey Pascal, another friend of Mia Farrow. Casey Pascal implies Woody is a pedophile on the HBO series. Her evidence? He plays with Dylan at the playground. For Ziering and Dick to allow this correlation is irresponsible. They imply that parents should stop playing with their kids on playgrounds for fear of being branded a predator. It's complete hyperbole. Why even interview Pascal? She's not a therapist, a social worker, or detective, or a child advocate. There were plenty of actual experts they could have chosen from. And I don't mean tangential witnesses uninvolved in the case. I mean witnesses who actually worked with Woody or the children, like Lieutenant Richard Marcus, or the social workers that supervised Woody's visits with Dylan and Ronan. Those would be key witnesses. Casey Pascal's observations, on the other hand, don't shed light on the abuses. It only creates innuendos. The only thing Casey Pascal's comments really prove is that she's about as fun as she looks. Why didn't she get off her lazy ass and join Woody in playing with the kids and actually be a fun, engaged parent? And for the record, for those of you out there who are parents, playing with your children on the playground is a good thing. Don't let HBO scare you into thinking that it's predatory behavior. Today, Ronan Farrow is a walking manifestation of Mia's gaslighting and hypocrisy, and as a journalist, he has a duty to tell this story honestly. When he was given an opportunity to stand up for Soon Yi as a victim of child abuse and revenge porn, he did the opposite. He tried to catch and kill her story. He tried to silence her and shut down her story before it was published. This is a man who claims to be an advocate for victims, and a man who claims to believe in the free press.
We should have the free press in this country. Reporters shouldn't be threatened.
And yet he threatened reporters and tried to stop New York Magazine from publishing her story. This is also evidence that there may have been an active campaign to silence the story of abuse against the Asian American children for a long time. Like his mother, he presents a public progressive face, but privately, he's tolerated the abuses and deaths of children of color, the ones that used to take care of him, cook for him, clean for him, change his diapers. He hasn't gone through the court testimony and refuted them, or addressed his own therapy that he received to erase his love for his father. He has instead allowed an anti-factual narrative to take center stage in America, and this is a serious failure. Today, there's a community of activists who practice anti-factual thinking and believe celebrity Satanists are raping children. Ronan Farrow's mother was a pioneer leading that charge. Before QAnon existed, Mia literally tried to make the world believe a false narrative of child rape by a celebrity that she called a Satanist without facts or evidence. It's a conspiracy narrative that people still believe to this day because people like Mia Farrow made it so, and because journalists like Maureen Orth and Ronan Farrow have failed at their jobs. The pattern continues to this day. When Soon Yi told us the truth in 2018, every journalist who wrote about it criticized Soon Yi. Many of these journalists work for renowned media outlets known for their progressive stance, like Slate and Vice. Journalists like Nicole Clark and Christina Cauterucci don't even provide even a cursory review of the most basic facts, or show trace amounts of sympathy to Soon Yi, a woman of color, an immigrant, a victim of abuse, a victim of revenge porn. Kataruchi not once mentions the abuses that Soon-Yi faced and relies on the same racist tropes that she is a naive puppet incapable of having her own mind. Clark tells Soon-Yi she's anti-Me Too. It's the height of progressive hypocrisy that these supposed progressives criticize a survivor, an immigrant woman and a woman of color. They ignore or minimize her abuse while fawning over the lies of a white woman whose narrative of abuse has already been disproven in court testimony and thorough investigations. Mia Farrow abused Soon-Yi. Priscilla Gilman was complicit in a campaign of revenge porn and talked shit about her. Casey Pascal distracted us with innuendo, and Maureen Orth published all of it in stories that failed fact-checking, depicting Soon-Yi as a dumb feral child with subpar intelligence who is socially inept. Then when Soon-Yi told us the truth about her abuses in 2018, Kataruchi and other journalists, mostly women, mostly progressive, called her a puppet and told her she betrayed the Me Too movement. For the past 30 years, white women have led the campaign against Soon-Yi. White women have not only failed Soon-Yi in her own home, they failed her in the press, and they clearly don't understand the principles of the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement was started in 2006 by Tarana Burke to focus on women of color, women like Soon-Yi, Tam, and Lark. But white women have co-opted the Me Too movement and perverted it to erase or minimize these women's stories of abuse, trauma, abandonment, and suicide. They prefer white victimhood. What was Tarana Burke doing before she started the Me Too movement? She was advocating for the Central Park Five. In other words, she was defending boys and men against baseless accusations of sexual assault, men like Woody Allen. Those who want to go after Woody Allen are betraying the Me Too movement. They should instead be advocating for Soon-Yi, Lark, and Tam, as well as Moses and Thaddeus. There's a simple solution that works for all of us, no matter which camp you're in. We all want Dylan to get justice. She needs to pursue Woody Allen on rape charges. She still has time. This would also be the right thing to do on principle. If a crime was committed, let the facts see the light of day. Let justice be served. Let the public hysteria come to an end. Let's get closure. Or she could pursue Woody in civil court as well. But you see, there's a problem for Mia Farrow. A trial would require investigation, testimony from professional therapists and social workers, and we have seen that they have all sided with Woody's innocence. It would also require corroborating facts, something that Mia doesn't want to do. And there's a bigger issue. Mia Farrow could be exposed for the multiple crimes she has committed against children. Mia knows it's not true, and she can't prove it. But her objective isn't justice. It's destruction of Soon-Yi and Woody Allen. It's fame. It's a desire to stay in the public light. When you go through the data, there is a feminist narrative that becomes clear. A story of strength and resilience, of women who stood up to adversity and carved their own path. But it's not the story that American feminists latch onto. Lark Previn's parents treated her like a personal domestic servant. Like the Sherpas that climb Mount Everest on a daily basis without credit, Lark helped raise all of Mia's children. She took care of Dylan and Ronan as well, and she kept the house operational, but Mia Farrow took all of the credit. But she wasn't just Mia's doormat. She found a way to stand up for herself. An observer noticed that she made a rude gesture at Mia once after Mia berated her. When Mia told all of the children to cast Soon-Yi aside and said, "Your sister is dead to us," Lark ignored her. This was before the internet. It was easy to lose touch with people. Despite her mother's orders, she wanted to find her sister. She happened to see her sister in a newspaper one day. The next day, she went to the office of the New York Post. She asked him, "Where's my sister?" She defied her mother's orders to reconnect with Soon-Yi. She obviously had a difficult childhood. She acted out. She shoplifted. She used drugs. She got tattoos. She liked bad boys and married a loser. But I believe the reason she was estranged was because she finally got tired of Mia Farrow's gaslighting. She might have been destitute and dying of AIDS. She was struggling to take care of 2 children on her own, but she didn't ask for anybody's help, ever. She worked as a house cleaner to make ends meet, and she gathered her meager savings to put her daughters through private school, only the best for them. She wanted them to live a better life than she did. She drove them to school every day, something her mother never did for her, despite being too tired to walk because she was deteriorating from AIDS. Despite her circumstances, she had enough pride to never go back to Mia Farrow and Andre Previn, her abusive, neglectful parents, and ask for money. Sadly, she died on Christmas Day. At her funeral, the priest said, Lark had very little money, but she tried to do a good job in bringing the girls up. She had dark moments, but she put one foot in front of the other and kept going for her own daughters. Lark learned from Mia Farrow's mistakes. When she had children of her own, she suffered for them, rather than make them suffer for her. Soon Yi was born into poverty from a single mother. She ended up being a runaway, living off the streets of Seoul. She was scrappy and eating out of trash cans, but she managed to survive with a little luck and a little kindness. One day, a kind Korean citizen brought her to a police station, and they in turn put her in an orphanage where she remembers being really happy for the first time. At least until Mia came and took her away. She wasn't saved, she was plucked. She remembers how odd it was, this lady who came to the orphanage with cameras. Why would a prospective mom bring cameras? She remembers being frightened by the scary, rageful fights between her parents, Andre and Mia. This home was never idyllic for her. She watched her white siblings get more love and personal attention from her mother, while she only received her mother's rage. She watched how they didn't have to do any of the housework, while she and her sister Lark had to serve the other children. But she had survived on the streets. She was scrappy. She took her mother's beatings and yelling in stride, and she refused to back down. She became self-sufficient. She made the mistake of falling in love with her mother's ex-boyfriend. She watched the American media turn on her and paint her in disgusting ways. She saw her most intimate moments traded for humiliation in the press by a mother and older brothers who were supposed to protect her. She was humiliated for a learning disability by her mom and in the press. She had no advocates in her home or the media. Feminists never stood up for her. She learned to avoid the public light. Despite her learning disability, though, she graduated with a master's degree in education. Despite the decades of cruelty from her mother and a lifetime of being the butt of rape and incest jokes from people who don't know her and don't know the facts, she moved forward with her life. She learned to be resilient and immune to a culture that misunderstands her. Her youngest sibling would end up being just as bad as the older white boys. She cooked and cleaned for him. She served him when he was a child, yet he would grow up to be ungrateful. When she finally told her story, Ronan too would vilify her and tell her that her abuse isn't real, and he tried to shut her story down. She watched while American journalists, mostly women, mostly white, continue to attack her 30 years later and won't shut up about her sex life. They were never kind to her then, and they wouldn't be now. But it didn't matter. She had already moved on. Her abuses would be a small part of her life, and she doesn't need the press on her side. She already understood that in America, abuse isn't real unless it's white. She would learn from her mother's mistakes and become a successful mother with 2 children. 2 is plenty. Her mother taught her that there is such a thing as having too many children. Soon Yi found true motherhood, lasting love, and happiness in a culture that hates her. And to me, that's the definition of defiance. This was a missed opportunity. We could have had an honest dialogue about how abuse really operates, that a single abuse usually indicates a pattern of multiple victims, that there are always hidden victims to any story. We could have talked about how narcissistic parents who put their feelings first can destroy the lives of their children, how the hubris of serial American adoption has a deadly cost. We could have debunked the myth that children who are adopted get saved, when in fact they can be more likely to face abuse and suicide than other children, that they are often discarded and treated as second-class citizens in their own homes. Instead, we have wasted our time chasing the silly story of a satanic pedophile and a vast Jewish conspiracy of payoffs. We continue to live with the ghost of a lie that has made us forget the true nature of abuse. I'm convinced at this point that Vanity Fair, HBO, and the rest of the American media will never get this story right. Even now, no media outlet has bothered to corroborate the facts of this story. But the rest of us, we can do better. It's 2021. Let the era of anti-factual thinking come to an end. We don't need the media to see the truth. There were plenty of other errors with the HBO documentary that I didn't even have time to point out, so I may make another video, but I will wait till after episodes 3 and 4. But until then, for those of you who continue to believe that Dylan Farrow was sexually assaulted by Woody Allen, I respect that, and I understand your sympathy. All I would ask is that you expand your empathy to all of the victims, including Lark, Thaddeus, Tam, Moses, and Sun Yi. I want to believe that we can have enlightened dialogue and disagree, and yet work together to add to our shared facts and put together the truth from this shattered story, a truth that encompasses all of the children. I will continue to review any credible evidence. I know I might have some details wrong, and I have no problem admitting that, because I'm not interested in being right. I'm interested in exposing crimes against children. We can cancel Woody Allen, but Dylan needs to take him to court to find justice instead of wasting her time with filmmakers. But can we also agree that Mia Farrow needs to be investigated for her multiple crimes against children? She's been gaslighting all of us for so long. But you and I, we can be the speakers for the dead and the voiceless, and find our way back to the true meaning of the Me Too movement. I hope this video has done its job in ending the madness so the dialogue can begin. Thank you, my friends, for watching.